Welcome back to Visual Anthology's Physical Inventory Training. In this fourth chapter, we'll be showing you how to download data from those portable rental scanners, how to review those batches, and how to post them so that their counts get added to the master PI record. Now in my system, I've already gone through and created a new PI record. And if you're not sure how to create a new PI, you should go back and review Chapter 3. You can see here that I have my master PI record, or the open status. It is a full PI, and I will be using the CS1504 scanner. You should have already printed and should have read through the connecting and using document. There's one for the CS1504 and one for the CS2000. This document has some very important information, basically on doing the PI, on entering in that authorization or PI scanning license. Basically, there's some other details that cover what kind of batteries, how many scans, other important information that you really should have available to you when you're doing the PI. I won't be able to get to all that detail during this training video. So print that out and have a copy of that handy, having read through it already. Another thing that you will want to do maybe the morning of your physical inventory is to gather everybody around who's going to be helping out and make sure that they're all able to identify the difference between a UPC barcode and a EAN barcode. If you have somebody who is mis-scanning the wrong kind of barcode, meaning they're going to get the UPC code, that is going to cause you, the person managing the PI, more time on the backside. So everything goes much faster if everybody is very clear on what the different barcodes are and what ones they should stay away from. So if you go to your help system, do special topics, understanding barcodes, you'll see we have 3 screenshots of the different kinds of barcodes out there. Again, the UPC barcode, the one that is usually on the back of the mass market paperback, is one they want to avoid. And they really want to use the EAN barcode, the one that starts with 978 or 979 for the newer titles. They'll want to use that barcode that's typically on the inside front cover. So make sure everybody's clear on that as well. That'll save you some time in the long run. So back to our physical inventory. There are a couple of different steps you'll need to do when downloading the scanner batches and then processing those batches. Your download option is underneath your action menu, underneath Get Data from Scanner. Now, I had already gone through and done Specify Scanners, so I've marked what kind of scanner I'm using. I'd also gone through and entered in my license for scanning. That's that authorization code. It's a big long string of numbers and letters, and you can see mine is good for a few more days yet. So I've done those steps ahead of time. There are 5 possible scenarios you might run into when you're dealing with cleaning up or reviewing those scanner batches that you're going to download. I'll try to hit each one in turn here. So the first possible scenario you might run into is simply just a bad scan. Damaged barcode, maybe they overran 2 barcodes at the same time, rare, but it does happen. And in that case, you'll want to decide what do you want to do in that situation. So I've gone out and I've scanned on purpose a few things and sort of mis-scanned on purpose here. I'm going to go into my master PI. I do have to be sitting on my open record or master PI in order for that get data option to be lit up. So I can be on the details tab if I want. It doesn't require that I am though. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my scanner, and I'll say get data from scanner. That series of beeps that you might have just heard were from the barcode, from the portable rental scanner. That basically was signaling that the program had connected to it, that it was downloading the data, and that finally the data was downloaded and the scanner memory itself was being cleared. So at this point, I've disconnected my scanner from its cable, and it's important to note, too, that you shouldn't leave it connected for a long period of time. That'll drain the batteries, and it also can cause the program to think you're trying to download yet another batch. So be sure you disconnect your scanner as soon as it's done beeping and flashing, and either put it in an empty pile of scanners or hand it to the next guy to use. So I have now downloaded my scanner batch, and if you'll notice, we now have a new record that, unlike the first one, has a status of scan, and it is a gray record. This scan status means it's something I've freshly downloaded, but I still need to review it and make sure it's in OK shape. So I'll go to the Details tab, and the first thing I see right off the bat is I notice there are some titles or some items with no title and no author and no section. What that is items that were scanned that we did not recognize the codes on. The program couldn't find an accurate match. So I need to deal with those items. Now what you're seeing here is an example of what a bad scan might look like. You'll notice that the SKU is much longer than some of the other ones that do have a title. So right away I'm kind of drawn to those titles and I know I need to do something about them. The first thing I might do is have my runner go out and find me the 5th, 6th, and 8th titles on that shelving unit and bring them back to me. Now in this case, it's something really odd going on and I want to kind of keep moving quickly throughout all this. Maybe I don't want to figure out the exact details of that item right now, but I don't want to count these items or at least double count them. So in this case, because it looks like just a bad scan, I'm going to go through and have my runner take those items that they pulled from that shelf and just put them in the middle of the room, make a big pile. We'll deal with that stuff at the end of the day. But for now, I want to remove these bad items. So I can go through and I can do F7, delete line. And I'll go through and I could delete each one by hand, or to save myself a little time, I could use my F6 consolidate, which will sum up all these other titles. So notice English time I have in a couple of times. It looks like 4 times, but each one has a count quantity of 1. When I do F6 consolidate, it's going to sum up all those items. And now it knows that there were 4 scanned of the English time, 2 of the Mighty Jackie, and 2 of this bad item. So it's a little easier now to just go in, and of course I'll do save first. I can easily go back here now and just delete this bad line item, something I'll deal with later on. That's the first possible scenario I might run into, is just flat out a bad scan, and I've decided in this case to remove it, and I'll deal with it later. There are a couple other scenarios we might run into, so let me go in and I'll of course save my changes, and we'll go out and scan a few other examples to show you the next possible scenario. Okay, I've gone out and I've now scanned a second shelf of items. So now I need to download this batch as well. And again, I need to be on my Open PI, and I can go to Actions, I'll connect my scanner, and now I'll do Get Data from Scanner. Okay, so my scanner is finished flashing and beeping. I'll disconnect it, hand it to the next guy. Now I'm ready to review this second batch of items. Now in this case, I may have found some items that, and again, you can notice right away that I'm seeing some blank items. And these happen to be what looks like regular ISBN 10 items, but apparently they weren't in my system already. So my runner's gone out, and they've had them pull the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and so forth. They've pulled those titles, and they're bringing them back to me to deal with. Instead of putting them in the pile in the middle of the room, since these look like normal barcode items that I want to look into and fix, normal ISBNs rather, I'm going to go through and look through the pile of stuff they've just brought back. So at this point, because they've already pulled them from the shelf and I've got them sitting in front of me, I actually want to save myself some time right now and do F6 consolidate. That way it's a little easier to deal with when I'm looking at them. And in fact, now this Big George title is one we've got, but there are 2 items in this list that I don't have a match for. And in fact, the first one that they pulled is something that looks fairly new, and in fact, maybe it's fetchable. Maybe it's something that is out there that I could bring in. So that title happens to be Draconian Measures, and I recognize its ISBN as right here. And when I first touch that record, when I click on it, the system recognizes right away that, oh, it's not in the master inventory, but it's fetchable. So it's going to go out and try to fetch that item. So right away, it's going to say, do you want to grab that? Yes. So now it's going to pull in any detail it could find. I don't want to mess with this on-hand value. I'm not interested in that right now. I'm more interested in just fetching this title. Everything looks good. And I'll just say that this is a fiction title. I can adjust the publisher. I don't have Wizards on the Coast in my system, so I'll add them. But for now, I'll go ahead and do F12 post. This will add it to my master inventory. It now shows me a title when I'm looking at this batch. It's in the master PI as well. So at this point, I have successfully brought in and fixed this item. I now have a match for it. I'm seeing a title. So I have my runner pick up that draconian item that I just fetched, and I have him go put it back on the shelf, and I mark that shelf as, at least that chunk of items, as having been done, counted. Which takes me to the second item that was blank. Now, the last item they brought me looked kind of old. In fact, this store does used books, and this is an older title, and it looks like it is a normal ISBN, but it's actually so old that it's not in my database of books, and in fact, when I click on it, nothing happens. But I decide, you know, I found 2 copies of it. I do want it in this batch. I want it counted, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to force the system to add it to the inventory. Now, before I do that, of course, I should always save my changes. So I'll do F10 save. Now I can go in and I can force the system to be this item to be added to the system. So I'll do Alt F5, add to inventory. What this does is it gives me the opportunity to add it to the master files inventory, add it to this batch record, and make sure it's in the master PI so I can keep counting it. If I do this step and I find more of it somewhere else, it'll be much easier in the next time I find this title in this series of scans. So I'll do Alt F5, add to inventory, and kind of like a fetch, but it's going to basically bring me to an insert inventory screen where I now have the opportunity to fill in all that detail of this item. In fact, this happens to be a bread machine baking title. And yes, it's a book, and I believe I have a cooking section. There we go. And the author looks like Laura Brody. I'm going to skip the on-hand for right now. That looks good enough for now, so I'll do F10 save. So, by doing that Alt F5 add to inventory when it was a ISBN that was non-fetchable, I was still able to force it to get added to the inventory and to be on this batch record with its title, and it's also on that open PI record as well. So I've successfully handled those 2 items that were scanned but didn't at first have a title when I came into this batch. Of course, I need to save my changes at this point, which takes me to the other possible scenario, and that one is usually when the UPC has been scanned, and there's 2 possible things you might run into with that one. So let me go back to my list tab, back to the open PI. Okay, so now I've gone out and I've scanned yet another shelf of items, and there is a couple of possible items that I'm going to have to deal with. In this case, the third scenario I need to deal with is what happens when they scan a UPC barcode. That causes me a little bit more work than the other situations. So, I have scanned my items. I'm now sitting on the open PI record. I'm going to connect my scanner, go to Actions, and do a Get. Okay, so my scanner is finished beeping and flashing. I'm going to disconnect the scanner, give it to the next guy in line. So now I can go and review the third batch here. I'll go to Details. And so right off the bat again, I notice there's some more items who have no title. And this is another scenario that you might run into. Again, you can see that all the items in this batch are right now in the entry order, the order they were scanned in. And from here, I can take a look at this batch quickly, and I can tell my runner, okay, we have some more bad items we need to deal with. Please go pull the, looks like 5th, 6th, 8th, and 9th titles from that shelving unit. Bring them back here because we're going to deal with them and wrap them up in this batch. So my runner goes out, and they pull those titles, and they bring them back to me. So the first thing I want to do, again, to make my life a little easier, is I'm going to go ahead and do another consolidate just to get everything to sum up so I got a little bit shorter list to deal with here. So here we have what looks like UPC codes. They're much longer than the ISBN 10. They look a little bit different. There's no title. So I have two possible situations to deal with when the person doing the scanning has accidentally scanned the UPC code. The first scenario is this item of 03714500799 and so forth. They scanned a UPC, the back cover of a mass market paperback. And it happened to be an item that was not in my system already. And again, because it's UPC, it's not fetchable, but they've brought it to me and I noticed that, oh, wait a minute, it's actually a title I know I've got in the system. It's a title called Hominids. So I had found that they had scanned 2 of the UPC for the Hominids title, but I needed to get into this batch so it can be recognized, the real ISBN number. So because my runner has brought that title to me, I can do F5 new line, and I can enter in the ISBN that I want to use. So I've now typed in the ISBN for that Hominids title, and you notice down here in pink it's showing you the title, and I can put in the 2 that it really should have counted. So there's 2, and now I have the good version of the Hominids in here, and here is the old bad UPC version, which now, because I have the 2 I really wanted counted here, I can delete this line item. Of course, don't forget to save. I'm going to go in now and I'm going to delete the bad version. So now my runner could actually go back and reshelve those 2 copies of the Hominids so I can consider them having been counted. The other possible situation you might run into, which is something that requires you guys have done a bit of setup beforehand, is when they scan a UPC, but it's a UPC that I had already put into my system when I first entered that item. In this case, my runner has brought back a title called Humans, and I notice that Humans is actually showing me a particular ISBN, but I notice that on its back cover that its UPC is that 03714500699 number. Now it happens to be that this one, and you can't see it just yet, but it happens to be that the inventory item for this is one where not only did I enter in the ISBN when I created it, but I also took the time when I was creating that inventory item to scan in its UPC code into that secondary item/SKU field. So when I touch this record, the system actually recognizes it. Now, right now at this very moment, notice the title doesn't show anything, but I do show the Humans title down here, and it's recognizing it by its UPC code. Now, I should save my changes right here. Oftentimes, if I move off that record, it might recognize it and update it, but if it doesn't, I can usually do Alt F5. You've used that before when you're trying to force in something that was a manual add, but when I use that option sitting on something that's already out there, I cause it to refresh. So by doing Alt F5, notice right away now with that longer SKU number, the UPC string, it is now showing me a title of Humans. And when I force this grid to refresh, either by saving or clicking off to another record, notice right there it switched from the UP string to the correct ISBN string. Now, hopefully you don't have to run into this option too much, and it really depends on you having had already entered in that UPC code into the master record. In fact, I'll go show you what that looked like. I saved myself a step in the physical inventory because when I was creating that inventory, I took that time to go in and scan that UPC code right here. Most people don't tend to do that. It does seem to be a bit time consumptive, and hopefully when they start going to the new EAN 13 system, you won't have to deal with this issue quite as much, but you can see that having the foresight to enter that UPC code in ahead of time saved me a little bit of work in the PI, made it a little bit easier for me. But ultimately, I've dealt with those two items that they scanned the UPC code in. I dealt with them right in this batch, and my runner has now gone back and put those items back on the shelf. They've been counted for the most part. So at this point, I've corrected this batch, and I'm happy with it. Now, there is one last phase that we need to go through, and that is sort of posting these updates, posting these batch records. I'd like to go back and show you in that very first scan batch this English time title. Notice that we had counted 4 in this batch, and we had actually counted a few more in the third batch. So there's the English time. So we found 4 in the first one, 4 in the last one. Now, if I actually go through, I can show you what the master PI looks like before I have posted any of my scanner batches. I have not officially counted or summed up into my master PI those English time titles yet. In fact, when I go to my open PI and I look at it, you'll notice that there's the 10 that the system thinks I had on hand when I created the PI, but there's nothing in the count columns. But if I go to my first batch and I'm happy with it, I settled everything out, I got the numbers looking the way they want, everything has a title. When I do F12 post, it's going to take the 4 from this English time batch and it's going to add it to the master PI. So I'll do F12 post and I'll say yes, I want to post that update. Notice its status has gone to update. I can no longer change items on this batch. It looks a little different when you're looking at the list tab. But if I go back to my master PI and I do another F8 find line, I'll put in that ISBN, you'll notice now I do show 4 in the count column. Further, if I were to post this master PI and say yes, to say, okay, now sum up all those titles I found so far, I've now made that count quantity column be added to the total count column. Later on in the day, if I've now gone in and posted my third batch, we'll add those other 4 to it. And by the way, notice I now have a manual batch record. This is a record of all the items that were in that master PI record that I had affected. I just basically accepted and moved from count to total count on the master PI those quantities for those items. Those really aren't records you're going to do much with once you're all done. But if I go back and I post my third batch that has yet 4 more copies of English time, I'll post that update, I'll say yes, and now let's go back to the master PI record and you'll see what happens. We'll find that item. So here's English time. I posted 1 batch already. We had ended up with 4 in the count column. I then posted my master PI, the open one, which moved that 4 from the count column to the total count. And now I've posted my third batch, which had 4 more, and so now those 4 are in the count column. Now, if I were to post my master PI one more time, it will now have added that 4 in the total count column with the 4 in the count column. So now I have 8 in my total count column. So your batches add to your count column. You'll keep adding them, and I could have just added 1 batch and then the next I would have ended up with 8 in the count column, the count quantity column. I just keep adding to that number, and then periodically I'll post my master PI, the open record, which will sort of sum up all those numbers again but move them over to the total count column. We'll get more into finalizing the PIs in the next chapter, but just so you get the basic idea, we've gone through, we downloaded 3 different batches with 3 different possible scenarios. The first one being just a bad scan in general, which I just flat out deleted from that batch, had my runner put that in the middle of the room. The second scenario was that the staff scanned an EAN barcode, the inside front cover of a paperback, but they weren't in my system, and in one case it was fetchable, in one case it wasn't. And then the third possible scenario is when they scan the UPC code, but in one case I had to just go in and find the correct version and add that to the batch by using F5 new line. And in the other case, though, I had already put in previously the UPC code that they had scanned in this case, and I was able to find that item by using Alt F5 add to inventory. I forced that batch to refresh and put those counted quantities on the correct version of that item. So there's 3 different possible scenarios you might run into. Take a look at your physical inventory documents. That covers that in a lot more detail. And then you'll also see those 2 manual batches that got created just by us posting that master PI record. That's about it for chapter number 4. Chapter number 5 will be more about doing manual PIs or hand counts, or possibly dealing with items that didn't have barcodes when you're doing the rental scans. So anybody who is doing hand counts and anybody using rental scanners should be watching chapter 5 as well.